talk about the beautiful business of milk today. Yeah, yeah. I got milk. Let's talk about milk. Oh yeah, baby, let's talk about the beautiful business of milk today.
This episode of Got Milk is sponsored by Shunya Agritech, the folks revolutionizing cattle nutrition with hydroponic green fodder. Visit their website at shunya.live for more details or download the Shunya app from Play Store or App Store.
All right, welcome everyone. Today we're doing a deep dive into India's dairy industry. It's a global giant, but facing some unique challenges. We're going to be looking at a recent research paper to break it all down. We'll call it Dairy Industry Challenges in India. So think of it this way. You're prepping for a meeting with some investors who are really into international dairy, right? And you want to sound like, the Indian market inside and out. Well, that's what we're here for.
It's a fascinating case, for sure. I mean, you got to start with the fact that India is the world's largest milk producer. They're responsible for something like 13% of global production. And here's the kicker. All that milk consumed domestically.
Whoa, that's a lot of milk. So what does that tell us about how important dairy is in India?
Well, for one thing, it just shows the sheer scale of the industry within India. It's massive. And milk is a vital protein source, especially for the huge vegetarian population. So it's really ingrained in their diet and culture.
So we've got this huge industry fulfilling a really important need. But the research paper hints that it's not all sunshine and rainbows, right? What's the first big hurdle we need to get our heads around?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is the low milk yield they get per cow. India averages about 987 kilograms of milk per cow per year. Now compare that to, say, Denmark. They're getting around 6,273 kilograms.
Wow, that's quite a difference.
Oh, and Israel, they're hitting a whopping 11,000 kilograms per cow annually.
11,000. Seriously. I mean, Israel, they have a pretty hot climate, don't they? I always thought climate was a big factor in how much milk you get from a cow.
Yeah, it's a common misconception that hot climates mean less milk production. Israel is a perfect example of how, with the right strategies, you can get high yields anywhere. They've got really efficient systems in place for managing feed and water, and their breeding programs are top-notch. They've become a model for success, honestly.
So if Israel can pull that off, what does that say about India's potential?
Well, it shows there's a huge opportunity for improvement. Right now, those low yields mean higher production costs for Indian farmers, and that puts them at a real disadvantage in the global market.
Makes sense. Higher costs mean it's harder to compete. So what else is impacting the affordability of milk in India?
The distribution system plays a big role. It's really complex with multiple tiers and often a lot of private entities involved. All that adds up to inflated prices for the consumer.
Ah, so the middleman strikes again. How much of a price difference are we actually talking?
Well, the paper highlights an example from Gujarat. Cooperatives there buy milk from farmers for about, let's say, 25 to 28 rupees per liter.
Okay.
But by the time it reaches the consumer, the price has almost doubled. You're looking at 48 to 52 rupees per liter.
Double. Wow. Seems like streamlining that whole process would make milk a lot more accessible for everyone. Now, what about other challenges impacting India's dairy industry on a global scale?
Well, quality control is another hurdle they're facing. There are concerns about unsanitary handling practices, both on farms and during processing. And this has led to cases of Indian milk products being rejected by international markets.
Ouch. So not only does it hurt their export potential, but it also raises concerns domestically too. So we're seeing this complex picture emerge. Huge production, but lower yields, a complicated distribution system, and then these quality control issues. Sounds like there are some real weaknesses holding the industry back.
Absolutely. But it's not all bad news. The researchers actually did a SWOT analysis, outlining the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It helps us understand the bigger picture.
Okay, let's break down that SWOT analysis. What are some of the big strengths that jump out?
Well, first off, India has a massive livestock population, which is a huge asset. And there's a lot of room for improvement with those yields we were talking about. Plus, you've got a growing middle class with more and more purchasing power.
So a strong base to build on with a market that's ready to buy more. But we can't ignore those weaknesses. What were some of the most critical ones they identified?
The limited use of high-yielding cattle breeds is a big one. And then there are infrastructure challenges, especially with things like road connectivity. That makes it hard to transport milk efficiently.
Yeah, I bet. And I imagine the lack of awareness about modern farming practices doesn't help either. How much of a factor is that?
It's pretty significant, actually. That, coupled with the slow growth rate and the lack of reliable data, it makes investors hesitant to jump in.
So some internal hurdles to overcome.
Yeah.
What about external threats? What's keeping industry leaders up at night?
Loss of grazing land is a big one. Urbanization and industrialization are eating away at it. And then there's the threat to indigenous cattle breeds from all this crossbreeding. That could have some serious long-term consequences.
Yeah, those are some long-term risks to think about. What about the immediate competition? Are alternative milk products starting to make a dent in the market?
Oh, absolutely. Consumer distrust is a real issue, especially with all the milk adulteration scandals. And then you have the rise of plant-based milk alternatives. Those are posing a real challenge to the traditional dairy industry. And of course, we can't forget the influence of those middlemen. That adds another layer of complexity to everything.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag, that's for sure. But amidst all these challenges, there must be some bright spots, right? What opportunities are out there?
Well, there are actually quite a few. The global market offers a lot of potential for expansion, and India's economic growth is attracting a lot of investors. Plus, there's a lot of potential in things like forward integration with cooperatives and exploring new technologies like animal hostels.
Animal hostels.
Yeah.
That's something I definitely need to hear more about.
We'll dive into that in the next part. It's an innovative approach to cattle rearing. Could be a real game changer for some of the challenges we've been talking about.
This is already so insightful. Feels like we're just scratching the surface of this complex industry.
Yeah.
But before we get to those animal hostels and all the possibilities of modernization, let's take a moment to reflect on everything we've learned so far.
Okay, so about these animal hostels, what's interesting is they're not actually hostels for animals like you might think.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Now I'm even more curious. What are they then?
Think of it like a cooperative cattle rearing system. Farmers pool their resources, their knowledge, to manage a shared facility. It's where their animals are housed and cared for.
So like a shared apartment building, but for cows.
Exactly.
So it's about using that collective power, right? For
Yeah.
better efficiency, resource management. What are the main advantages of this kind of setup?
Well, it tackles a few challenges at once, actually. For example, that limited access to modern infrastructure and technology we talked about. The animal hostel becomes this centralized hub with shared resources. So farmers can access things like advanced milking systems, veterinary care, things they might not be able to afford on their own.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it probably makes it easier to adopt those high-yielding breeds and best practices if everyone's working together, pooling resources.
Exactly. And there's more. It creates economies of scale. So things like vet care, buying feed, even collecting the milk, it all becomes more cost-effective. That helps lower production costs, and that makes Indian dairy products more competitive.
This sounds like it could be a real game changer, especially for those smaller farmers who are struggling to modernize. But are there any downsides to this model?
Well, it's not a perfect solution, of course. There are challenges, like how do you ensure everyone participates fairly, and how do you manage potential conflicts between all these different farmers? Imagine trying to get dozens of farmers to agree on, well, anything.
That's a good point. I guess any new system comes with its own set of wrinkles to iron out. But overall, it seems like a really promising approach, especially for tackling some of those weaknesses we were talking about.
Definitely something to keep an eye on, for sure. And it really ties into this bigger theme of modernization. That's gotta happen if India's dairy industry wants to reach its full potential.
So animal hostels are one piece of the puzzle. What are the other key pieces? What else needs to change?
Technology adoption is huge. I'm talking things like automated milking systems, precision feeding, data-driven herd management. It's all about using technology to boost efficiency, improve quality, and ultimately increase profitability.
That sounds pretty high-tech. How much of this is actually happening on the ground?
It's already making a difference in some areas. Automated milking, for example, not only makes things more efficient, but it also addresses some of those hygiene concerns we talked about. You remove the risk of contamination from manual handling. So it's a win-win, better quality and better productivity.
So it's not just about producing more milk, it's about making sure it meets those international standards too. What about those other technologies, like the precision feeding? What's that all about?
Precision feeding is about tailoring nutrition to each individual animal's needs. No more one-size-fits-all approach.
So like personalized nutrition plans, but for cows.
Exactly. By giving each cow the optimal nutrition, farmers can significantly boost milk yield.
Interesting. And data-driven herd management. I'm guessing that helps farmers make better decisions about their herds.
Absolutely. It's about using data to optimize everything, from breeding and genetics to milk production and overall herd health. Imagine having real-time insights into each cow's performance and health.
Wow, that's amazing. So modernization isn't just about buying fancy new equipment. It's about adopting a whole new way of thinking, a new way of managing dairy farms.
Exactly. It's about embracing a more scientific, data-driven approach to make everything more efficient, more sustainable, higher quality.
And this all ties back to those opportunities for global market expansion, right? If India can improve its quality and efficiency through modernization, they can become a major player on the international dairy scene.
Absolutely. Imagine high-quality, affordable Indian dairy products becoming a global commodity.
That would be pretty incredible. But we can't forget about those threats we talked about, like losing grazing land and the rise of milk alternatives. How can the industry tackle those challenges?
Well, it's important to remember that every challenge also presents an opportunity. For example, the pressure on grazing land could actually speed up the adoption of those more intensive technology-driven farming models, like those animal hostels we discussed.
Yeah, that's a good point. It could actually drive innovation, a shift towards more sustainable practices. But what about competition from plant-based alternatives?
Well, that's pushing the dairy industry to innovate and differentiate itself. It's not enough to just produce milk anymore.
So maybe focusing on premium quality, unique milk products. Even exploring those niche markets like organic milk or milk for people with lactose intolerance.
Exactly. It's about adapting, evolving, staying ahead of the curve.
It sounds like India's dairy industry is at a crossroads, facing some big challenges, but also with a lot of potential. So where does that leave someone like me who's thinking about investing in this industry?
It's a dynamic landscape, that's for sure. A lot of excitement, a lot of innovation. It's a fascinating area to watch and potentially to invest in.
I'm definitely eager to hear more about those innovations and how they're shaping the future of the industry. But before we dive deeper, let's take a quick pause to gather our thoughts. We'll be right back to continue our deep dive into the fascinating world of Indian dairy. Okay, we're back, ready to wrap up our deep dive into the Indian dairy industry. We've covered a lot, from the sheer size of it all to the challenges they're facing, and of course, all that exciting potential for modernization and innovation.
Yeah, we've explored some really interesting stuff like those animal hostels and the rise of data-driven technologies.
Definitely a lot of opportunity for growth and transformation, but some serious hurdles to overcome too.
For sure. And if we bring this back to you and those investors, there's a lot to think about.
Right, this whole deep dive was about helping me sound like a pro in that meeting. So can we do a quick recap of the key takeaways?
Absolutely. So first off, India is the world's biggest milk producer. They consume everything they produce domestically. Milk is a huge part of their culture, a vital part of their diet, especially for that large vegetarian population.
Okay. But even with all that production, they're lagging behind in terms of milk yield per cow.
Right, and that means higher production costs, which makes it harder to compete on a global scale.
And we can't forget that complicated distribution system. All those middlemen driving up prices for consumers.
Absolutely. And those quality concerns are a real barrier to breaking into the export market.
It's a lot to take in. But the SWOT analysis did highlight some pretty significant strengths too, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Huge livestock population, growing middle class with more money to spend, and a strong cultural preference for milk. Those are some solid fundamentals.
And then there's the potential for improvement through modernization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Adopting higher yielding breeds, new technologies, those animal hostels we talked about.
So many possibilities. So knowing all this, what kind of investment strategy makes sense in the Indian dairy market?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. Should investors be focusing on supporting modernization efforts? Like putting money into technology or infrastructure? Or would it be smarter to focus on sustainability and building back consumer trust?
There's no easy answer, unfortunately. It depends on your risk tolerance, your goals, what you see for the future of the industry.
So it's about weighing those different opportunities and risks and coming up with a strategy that makes sense.
Exactly.
Well, thanks to this deep dive, I feel like I have a much better understanding of what I'm getting into.
You're well on your way to becoming an expert yourself. Just remember, the learning never stops. There's always more to uncover.
That's the beauty of a good deep dive, right?
Yeah.
It opens up so many more questions.
Exactly.
Well, this has been incredibly helpful. I feel a lot more prepared for that meeting now. Thanks for guiding me through this fascinating world,
You got it?
and to all our listeners out there. Until next time, happy learning.